The story of the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Automobile Museum is not just one of sedans, coupes, or convertibles. It's a story of relentless drive and passion, of persistence, artistry, rural innovation, and Hollywood glamour. It's also one of corporate intrigue, failure, and ultimately, resurgence. Like many dreams of the post-World War I era, the building where these elements were fused together in the roaring 20s and early 30s wasn't guaranteed success, and it wasn't promised survival. In fact, the place where you're seated right now was threatened with the wrecking ball more than once. This place has weathered competition and bankruptcy, a Great Depression, a Second World War, federal inquiries, investigations, and blight, all in a small Midwestern town that also had to reimagine its own future to stay alive. From its dreams to its demise, this story is uniquely American. Where did this story begin? Auburn, Indiana was destined to be a crossroads of innovation. The town was incorporated in 1849, located at the intersection of two major trails, Goshen Defiance Road and Coldwater Road. Like many Midwestern towns, Auburn thrived on farming, agriculture, carpentry, and transportation. One of its first notable businesses was the Eckert Carriage Company. Carriage making was an industrious pursuit for the entire Eckert family, but sons Frank and Morris Eckert had their eyes on something bigger, the horseless carriage. In the late 1800s, the automated carriage was still something of a futuristic device. Some initial automobiles in Europe ran on steam, electricity, or even hydrogen gas. The development of gas-powered vehicles spilled over into the United States soon after. Nearly every town had a wagon maker, and entrepreneurs of every stripe and in nearly every state felt that they could build their own car. This was a technological land rush, and the Eckert boys were inspired. They wanted in. Dissatisfied with the price and quality of available autos at the time, Frank Eckert set out to assemble his own, and the Auburn Automobile Company was born in 1900. At the time, it had joined the ranks of more than 2,000 companies that had emerged in the United States in the early 1900s in the race to cash in on America's growing obsession with horseless carriages. The first Auburn models were an elegant and obvious evolution of Eckert's carriages, but like many modest auto manufacturers, success was neither immediate nor guaranteed. The Eckerts expanded their operations and Auburns lined the streets of their namesake city. The Auburns grew in size and shape to meet demand, but by 1918, the world was embroiled in the First World War. The Eckert family had endured one challenge and hardship too many, and in 1919, finally sold the Auburn Automobile Company to a group of investors in Chicago. While the financiers looked ahead with dreams of efficiency and prosperity and marketed the Auburns nationwide for the first time, competition with larger auto manufacturers for parts, supplies, and materials was an expensive proposition. Auburn was producing 6 cars a day in 1922, but sales were falling over 30%. By 1924, the company had outlasted the 8 other car companies in Auburn, but to survive, it needed more than money and investors. It needed fresh leadership and a shot of adrenaline. Adrenaline was delivered in the person of E.L. Cord, who arrived in Auburn, Indiana to shake the dust off the lot. He slashed the prices and instigated total makeovers to unsold Auburns, making them brighter, more colorful, and eye-catching. And Cord also decided something else. The Auburns wouldn't be just for farmers anymore. Within months of his arrival, the former salesman from Chicago set his sights on creating prestigious automobiles for prestigious customers. certain that the more appealing Auburns would attract wealthy buyers and serve to advertise the company's car lines to others. To do so, the cars had to look sleeker, faster, and like the more expensive competitors. They had to ditch the look of the previous decade, and as they did, the boxy, imposing lines of the company's automobiles began to relax. Before then, many cars were modest. Most were just a step above the wagon. The 1926 Auburn was a part of Cord's overhaul. The Roadster earned Auburn a 52% increase in sales, while the competitors averaged only 1%. Cord was gaining on the competition. Cord knew he had to expand Auburn's production capabilities and attract top design talent to truly reinvigorate the company, and he started with a couple of race car drivers. In Indianapolis, Indiana, a fledgling automotive manufacturer known as the Duesenberg Motors Company, owned by German immigrants August and Frederick, had turned its love of engineering and racing into building cars for the general public. By 1926, they developed the four-wheel hydraulic brake system and gained a reputation for making some of the fastest engines in the Midwest. Duesenberg engines would eventually win the Indianapolis 500 on 4 separate occasions and otherwise dominated the roster of finalists. But while they were fine engineers making engines for military ships and race cars, the Duesenberg brothers failed to win similar acclaim when it came to marketing or production. When Duesenberg did manage to produce a vehicle, they were heavier, longer, and rode atop larger wheels than nearly everything else on the road, but they were faster and more powerful. While they look like $1 million, they cost a pretty penny too. Despite investors and accolades, the Duesenberg Motors Company was floundering by the late 1920s. And then Cord came in the form of a savior. To him, the opportunity was clear. Roll the brains and brawn of the Duesenbergs under Auburn's administrative hood and create the world's best automobiles. Cord immediately set about on a marketing campaign to promote new, supercharged Auburns, Duesenbergs, and another new line of automobile, the Cord. The Cord L29 made history by becoming the first manufacturer in the country to mass produce a front-wheel drive automobile. The Cord automobiles embodied its namesake's desires: sleek, elegant, and robust. And they were powered by Lycoming Engines' experience in designing aircraft engines. The L29 cost $3,195. That's $50,000 in today's dollars. As the Auburn Automobile Company reached further into the hearts and minds of Americans with product placement in Hollywood films and prestigious marketing campaigns, Cord's galley of young and talented designers and engineers only continued to grow. All of this was taking shape in the heat of the Art Deco era, when artistry, architecture, and organic materials like wood and stone were interwoven in a style that, if not somewhat streamlined and futuristic, at least leaned toward a newer, brighter future. This was the era when swing and later jazz exploded into major American cities, when buildings scraped the sky, when the pageantry of civic life was luminescent, cheerful, and forward-looking. The Art Deco style concealed the complicated shapes and mechanisms of ships, planes, and locomotives with graceful lines and sophisticated materials. During its heyday, Art Deco was equivalent with affluence, romance, exuberance, and universal faith and progress of all kinds. Naturally, it was the ideal time to design automobiles the same way. But 1929 wasn't far off. Even in the face of Black Tuesday, E.L. Cord advocated for bigger, better, bolder. Just as Cord began construction on a new visionary headquarters for the Auburn Automobile Company, the same building you're seated in now, the contrast between Cord's boundless imagination and a worldwide depression met head-on. Gently restyled by designer Alan Leamy, the Auburn 1931 was a glimmer of hope and enjoyed modest sales of over 30,000. But by then, the Auburn Automobile Company's chief champion and visionary had begun to rescind from view. Following the death of his 37-year-old wife, Cord remarried and moved to California, where he measured his passion for the automobile against a growing interest in aircraft. Combined with the ongoing economic depression and Cord's absence, Auburn struggled to keep its star shining bright. Its ingenuity and aesthetics did more to obscure its troubles than attract customers. As part of the Duesenberg acquisition, Cord had acquired the talents of designer Gordon Buehrig. From his intimately designed clay models evolved the long lines, low profile, and signature elements of the Cord 810 and 812 and the Auburn Speedster. Despite the ongoing depression, Buehrig's models would ultimately define the period of the classic Art Deco automobile. For a few years, the factories could hardly keep up with demands. Profits were at their best ever. But the long fingers of the stock market crashed panic banks and bankrupted consumers. The audience for Cord's darlings was shrinking. In an attempt to diversify, the company, renowned for its supercharged designs and luxury automobiles, started to develop kitchen appliances. Eager to appeal to the hearts, minds, and wallets of the depression-addled public, Auburn quickly furnished a delivery of nearly a dozen Cord 810s for the New York National Automobile Manufacturers Association show in 1935. The 810s were impressive, low-slung, eye-catching machines, a distinguished refrain to the easing grind of countrywide hopelessness. The Cords electrified the convention. Their streamlined shape held retractable headlights, electric windshield wipers, one of the first automobile radios, and a signature coffin nose grille. They were the definition of Art Deco, of effusive hope. But the show models were mechanically incomplete and lacked their semi-automatic transmissions, which would become deeply problematic once they were mass-produced. Promised to owners only a month after the convention, they were dispatched to customers without being properly tested. The cars were fast, gleaming, and adored, but their unreliability dealt Auburn a black eye it wouldn't recover from. The hope for a brighter future wound up being an unsustainable mirage. Over 1,000 models would be sold in 1936. Productions of Auburns and Duesenbergs would end shortly thereafter. Only 3,000 810s would be sold by 1937. Just 7 years after its opening, Cord's Art Deco headquarters would close its doors. The drafting rooms darkened. Equipment fell silent. The telephones and teletypes quieted. The emboldened exuberance that dreamed of building the best cars in the world was no more. As the country crept out of the Great Depression and endured World War II, people were still driving Auburns, Cords, and Duesenbergs, and over time they needed parts, repair, and service. Entrepreneur Dallas Winslow snapped up the former headquarters and distended pieces of the Auburn empire. The Auburn Cord Duesenberg Company was a new enterprise under a familiar name. It would initially start producing replacement parts and then completely new engines. The quality of timelessness was on the side of the automobiles. In precisely the way E.L. Cord had hoped, the cars he'd produced were now considered a personal extension of their owners, reflections of their tastes and their status. And by now, they were considered classics. And they developed a feverish following as a result. Gatherings of the classics sprang up around the country. By the early 1950s, the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Club was founded. Shortly thereafter, and the seeds for the Auburn Core Duesenberg Festival were sown as automobile owners gathered to appreciate their unique machines. But the work to sustain the remaining automobiles took its toll on the Auburn headquarters. Its elegant floors covered in grunge and machinery, it was now more garage than showroom. By 1960, Winslow had exited the business and sold both the building and the original blueprints to the automobiles. As quickly as Auburn advocates had rallied, the headquarters leaned into oblivion, reduced to an unglamorous menagerie of uses. It was the 1970s, and the historic landmark preservation movement was still in its infancy. Did the Auburn headquarters mean anything to anyone anymore? Within 4 years, a band of visionaries, local citizens believing passionately in the possibility of a museum, who would not give up their goal of rescuing the 1930 administration building of Auburn Automobile Company. They had steadily raised $105,000 to purchase the ramshackle structure. Like E.L. Cord, they had a grand vision too: salvation. A museum. Decades later, the headquarters of the Auburn Automobile Company glistens like the first day it opened. Its existence today is one of the few reminders of the time when automobiles were handmade and assembled, and manufacturers were independent and often local. In 2005, this building was designated as a National Historic Landmark. Today, more than 100,000 people visit Auburn for the museum and the festival each year. The museum has grown to be a leading cultural institution with 140 vintage, antique, classic, and special interest cars occupying the galleries once roamed by E.L. Cord, Roy Faulkner, Alan Leamy, and Gordon Burig. The Auburn Cord Duesenberg Automobile Museum is a monument to not only technological innovation, engineering, and automobile design, but to an era that was both ahead of its time and timeless. And now, it's yours to explore.